Okay, let's unpack this fascinating report on Pakistan's air defense systems.
Yeah, it's really timely.
You know, the Russia-Ukraine war has really thrown a spotlight on just how critical ground-based air defense systems, GBAS, are.
Absolutely.
And it seems to be pushing a lot of countries, including Pakistan, according to this source, to really ramp up their investments since 2022.
What's fascinating here is that it's not abstract anymore, is it? That conflict provided, well, real-world proof.
Undeniable proof,
It
yeah.
validated the absolute necessity of these systems in modern warfare.
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, we're taking a look at Pakistan's air defense specifically,
Mm.
how it all started, the pressures driving the changes we're seeing now, and, the actual systems the Army, Air Force, and Navy are bringing into the picture.
And our source for this is a detailed report from Qualwa. They've clearly done extensive research here.
Right. And our mission today is to kind of cut through the technical jargon in that report.
Yeah, pull out the important stuff.
Exactly. Pull out the most important insights for you, the listener. What does this evolution really mean for how Pakistan defends its airspace?
What are the big strategic shifts underway? What's the real story?
Let's maybe rewind the clock a bit. The report takes us back before the 1970s.
Right.
Air defense back then was, well, pretty different. It relied mostly on something called GCI, ground-controlled interception.
That's right. Think of it like this. You have surveillance radars on the ground, things like the British Type 21 or American FTS-20 mentioned in the report.
Okay.
Their job was basically to spot incoming aircraft and then direct friendly fighter jets to go intercept them.
So the fighters were the main tool.
Pretty much. The fighters, along with some basic anti-air guns, AGs, were your primary defense tools against intruders.
But by the 1970s, things started changing. There was this growing realization that SAM's surface-to-air missiles were becoming, well, increasingly important.
Yeah, a definite shift in thinking.
This led to a more structured effort. You had the creation of the Pakistan Air Defense Command in 1975.
And then Project Crystal followed in 1976.
Project Crystal, what was that specifically about?
Project Crystal was explicitly aimed at building an integrated, ground-based air defense program. So getting systems designed to actually work together.
Ah, integration, okay.
Exactly. Acquiring mobile radars like the Siemens MPDR, Central Control Centers, often called CRCs, and larger air surveillance radars like the American ANTPS-43.
And these early radar networks, they were paired with their first surface-to-air missiles.
That's right. The report mentions systems like the Thales Crowtail from France,
Okay.
and for a brief period, the Chinese HQ-2, which was actually based on the old Russian SE-2 system.
Right, the guideline. But what the source highlights, though, is that this early phase was largely focused on SARAD.
Short-range air defense, yeah.
These systems seemed primarily positioned to defend specific high-value facilities, like air bases particularly.
It wasn't really about broad territorial defense across the country.
Yeah.
That was still overwhelmingly seen as the job of the fighter fleet.
Got it. Meanwhile, the Army had its own separate track, didn't it?
It did. They focused on man-pads, man-portable air defense systems.
Shoulder-fired stuff.
Exactly. Like the Stinger, the Mistral, the RBS-70. Specifically designed to deal with low-flying threats, mainly helicopters that might be targeting ground troops.
Makes sense.
And here's an interesting detail from the report. The Navy.
Oh, yeah.
They even had a brief moment of area-wide anti-air warfare capability back in the 1980s.
How so?
Thanks to leasing U.S. frigates equipped with RIM-66 standardized SAMs. Pretty capable for the time.
Wow, okay. But the report points out that didn't last.
No. When those leases ended, they weren't able to replace that capability immediately. They kind of regressed to basic point defense systems on ships they acquired later.
Like the Chinese LY-60 mentioned.
Right. And it's only recently, as the report details, that they've started rebuilding that area-wide naval air defense capability again.
So, knowing they saw the importance of SAMs way back in the 70s, why did it take so long for Pakistan to make that serious leap into medium and long-range systems?
That's a key question the report addresses. It identifies two primary factors, really.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first was a strategic choice. Prioritizing offensive platforms.
Ah, the classic guns versus butter, but for military spending.
Sort of. Resources were directed towards building up major offensive capabilities, fighter jets, like the big JF-17 program.
Submarines, tanks, artillery.
Exactly. The thinking, especially given the nuclear context with India, was that a strong offensive capability was the main deterrent. That was the priority.
Okay, that makes strategic sense from a certain perspective. What was the second factor?
The second factor was more pragmatic.
Yeah.
Just a lack of available, effective medium to long-range SAMs on the market for them.
Really? You'd think systems would be available.
Well, the traditional major suppliers, the US and Russia, were often unwilling to sell these advanced systems to Pakistan for various geopolitical reasons.
Right. Politics always plays a role.
And European options, while sometimes available, were frequently seen as just too expensive.
So limited options and high costs.
Exactly. And this really set the stage for China and later Turkey to emerge as crucial alternative suppliers, filling that gap.
That makes a lot of sense. You use your limited defense budget where you think it has the biggest impact, and for a long time, that was the big offensive punch.
Right. But that strategic calculation started to face serious pressure.
And that leads to the turning point.
Yes, a clear turning point driven by two recent high-profile conflicts that pushed air defense investment across all the service arms, Army, Navy, Air Force.
Okay, let's talk about those. The first was a 2019 skirmish with India. Right.
That's the one. This conflict starkly highlighted the reality of standoff strikes.
Meaning weapons launched from a distance?
Exactly. Like the Indian Air Force using spicy glide bombs over Balakot. These could potentially be launched from within the attacker's own borders.
Ah, so the attacking plane doesn't even need to cross into your airspace.
Precisely. This exposed a critical vulnerability. The risk of precision strikes without the need for enemy aircraft to ever cross your border.
Which means you absolutely need the ability to neutralize these incoming standoff weapons, or SOWs.
Before they reach their targets, yes.
And that's where the SAM advantage comes in, I suppose?
It does. While fighters are obviously essential for air superiority, SAMs can potentially start the interception process against incoming threats much earlier in their flight path.
Maybe earlier than fighters could scramble and engage.
Potentially, yes. Especially against weapons launched from afar.
So the lessons learned in 2019.
They're then powerfully validated by the second major event, the Russia-Ukraine war.
Which is still ongoing, providing constant data.
Exactly. This conflict provided extensive real-world data. It demonstrated conclusively that well-deployed modern air defense systems could successfully neutralize large numbers of guided munitions and intercept advanced combat aircraft like the Su-30SM or Su-34.
So theory met brutal reality.
You could say that, seeing that undeniable real-world proof.
Combined with those new suppliers, China and Turkey, making modern SAMs actually available and affordable.
Led directly to that significant boost in air defense spending we mentioned earlier. And it wasn't just one service. It impacted the PAF, the Army, and the Navy.
And this brings us to the modern approach, detailed in the report.
A deliberate move towards a layered air defense system across all services, not just point defense anymore.
Okay, let's break down what this layered approach actually looks like, starting with the Pakistan Army.
Right. The Army system is known as Calliope Comprehensive Layered Integrated Air Defense.
Calliope. Sounds comprehensive.
It is. It's exactly what the name implies, multiple layers designed to intercept threats at different altitudes and ranges.
So what's the longest range layer?
At the longest range, classified as the MADS High to Medium Air Defense System, they use the Chinese HQ-9P.
HQ-9P, what are its specs, roughly?
The report gives a range of 125 kilometers. It uses what's called ARH, active radar homing.
Meaning the missile guides itself in the final phase.
Correct. It has its own little radar seeker. It's initially guided by a ground radar, the HD-233, via a data link.
Any other capabilities?
The report also notes it has some limited capability against ballistic missiles, which is interesting.
Okay, moving down a layer.
The medium-range layer, or low MADS, low to medium air defense system, uses the LY-80.
Yeah.
And its extended range version, the LY-80EV.
LY-80 ranges.
About 40 kilometers for the standard and 70 kilometers for the EV version. These use SAR semi-active radar homing.
So the ground radar has to keep illuminating the target for the missile.
That's right. The missile follows the reflected radar energy. They rely on IBS-150 and L-band radars, according to the source.
Got it. And below that?
Below that is ESHORADS, or Enhanced Short-Range Air Defense. This layer primarily features the FM-90.
FM-90. That sounds familiar.
It's an export version of the Chinese HQ-7, which itself was originally based on the French Crotel system.
Yeah.
So there's a lineage there.
Ah, okay. Range on that.
Up to 15 kilometers. It uses command guidance.
Meaning?
The ground radar tracks both the target and the missile and sends correction commands straight to the missile via data link. Keep flying this way, turn left, etc.
And its main targets?
It's designed specifically for those low-flying threats, drones, helicopters, and those tricky guided munitions we talked about.
Right, the standoff weapons or cruise missiles.
Potentially, yeah. And finally, the traditional HESHORADS layer.
The man pads.
Exactly. those shoulder-fired systems we mentioned earlier. RBS-70NG with about 9-kilometer range, Chinese FN-6, FN-16 around 6 kilometers, and their own indigenous ANZL-A Mk2 and Mk3 systems with about 5-kilometer range.
So the Army's big step, according to the report, has really been adding those medium and long-range layers since the mid-2010s.
That's the key takeaway, moving beyond just having HORAD and man-pads to a truly layered defense.
Okay, now let's look at the Pakistan Air Force, the PAF.
Right. The source indicates that historically SAMs weren't always central to the PAF's operational planning.
Their focus was more on...
Point defense for their own air bases, primarily. Fighters handled the broader air defense role.
But that definitely changed after 2019, didn't it?
Dramatically. The PAF is now incorporating SAMs heavily for territorial defense, creating a much longer range umbrella.
What are their main systems for this?
Their primary long-range system, intended for sort of regional coverage, is the Chinese HQ-9BE.
HQ-9BE, how does that compare to the Army's HQ-9P?
It's got a significantly longer range. The report states 260 kilometers against combat aircraft.
Wow, that's quite a reach.
It is. And crucially, the report says it can also intercept guided munitions up to 50 kilometers away and cruise missiles up to 25 kilometers. Plus, like the Army version, it has some limited capability against tactical ballistic missiles, TBMs.
So that HQ-9BE provides a very long reach, like a regional air defense shield near the border.
Potentially, yeah. That seems to be the idea. And complementing this, providing more area-wide coverage, is the HQ-16FE.
HQ-16FE, medium to long range.
Correct. A range of 160 kilometers against aircraft. It's quite capable, too.
How so?
It uses a dual-mode seeker employing both SAR and ARH, which gives it flexibility.
Best of both worlds.
Kind of. It's guided by a 2D active scanning radar with a 250-kilometer range that can reportedly track 12 targets and engage 8 simultaneously.
So the report suggests the PAF uses systems like the HQ-9BE and HQ-16FE together.
Yes, to create those layered coverage areas, much like how Russia's S-400 system uses different missile types for varied ranges within the same battery complex. It's about overlapping fields of fire.
Makes sense. Is the PAF doing anything at the shorter ranges?
They are. They're enhancing their air-based defenses, upgrading systems like the Spada 2000 Plus into the Spada CIWS.
CIWS, close-in weapons system.
Exactly. Often integrating a radar-guided gun, like the 35mm anti-aircraft guns mentioned here, with the missiles for last-ditch defense.
And technology development.
They're also working on indigenous sensor technology, like ELISA radars, those advanced active electronically scanned array radars.
Okay. And the report noted something about the ranges compared to the Army.
Yeah, it points out that the PAF seems to have deliberately acquired SAMs with significantly longer ranges than the Army's current systems. Suggests a clear division of labor, perhaps.
Interesting. Okay, finally, the Pakistan Navy, the PN.
Right. Their goal, as we touched on earlier, was really to restore that area-wide anti-air warfare, or AEW, capability that they lost decades ago.
The capability they had briefly with the leased U.S. ships.
Exactly. And according to the report, they've achieved this or are well on their way since 2022.
How?
Which platforms? Primarily through the acquisition of the Tigro-class frigates from China and the Babur-class corvettes from Turkey. New ships, new capabilities.
What SAM systems are they using for this area defense?
2 main ones highlighted. First, the naval variant of the LY-80, the same family the Army uses.
Ah, okay. On what ships?
Seen on the Tigro frigates. It has that 40-kilometer range, uses SARIN's guidance, INS being inertial navigation system.
And how many missiles?
Each Tigro carries 32 missiles in VLS vertical launch systems. Those tubes integrated into the ship's deck.
And the second system?
The second is the MBDA CAM-ER European missile.
CAM-ER range.
Stated as over 40 kilometers, so similar range bracket to the LY-80N, but it uses the more advanced REN's guidance, like the PAF's HQ-9BE fire and forget capability.
Where is that deployed?
It's deployed from VLS on the Babur-class corvettes with 12 missiles per ship currently.
Any plans to expand its use?
Yes, the report mentions it's planned for the future Chinook-class frigates, maybe 16 missiles there, and potentially could be retrofitted onto the Yarmouk-class patrol vessels and even the older F-22P frigates. So potentially becoming quite widespread in the fleet.
Okay, so we have the Army, Air Force, and Navy all building up their layered defenses, but are these efforts happening in isolation?
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
And the report says no, not entirely. There are key programs working to glue these tri-service air defense assets together.
Glue them together? How?
The primary initiative mentioned is the Recognized Air and Maritime Picture, or RAMP.
Ramp. What's that?
It's been under development since 1999, apparently. The basic idea is to combine sensor feeds data from all sorts of radars, land-based ones, ship radars, and importantly, AEW&C aircraft radars.
Those flying radar stations like the Erie Eye.
Exactly. Combine all that into a single unified picture of the airspace and the surrounding maritime areas.
Why is that unified picture so important?
It's absolutely crucial for modern air defense. It helps eliminate blind spots, gaps in coverage caused by the Earth's curvature or terrain masking,
Makes sense.
and allows the different services to make much more informed decisions about where to deploy their SAM batteries or fighters, or even what new technology they need to acquire.
So the Army could benefit from Air Force radar data.
Potentially, yes. The report suggests the Army could leverage radar feeds from PAF, AEW, and C aircraft for better situational awareness, for example. That kind of integration is key.
Beyond integration, is there a push for doing more domestically indigenous development?
There is. The report mentions that Pakistani industry is actively working on developing its own SAM systems.
Such as?
Things like the LOMADS, which is targeting a 7 to 100 kilometer range bracket, quite ambitious, and the FAAZ SL series, aimed more at the 20-25 kilometer range.
Any specific radar mentioned for these?
Possibly utilizing a domestically developed radar called MFADR, but details seem limited in the source.
And what about the drone threat? Everyone's talking about drones.
Critically, yes. The report notes significant work is underway on counter-UAS solutions, CUAS.
Because traditional SAMs aren't ideal for drones.
Right. The report notes that traditional expensive SAMs just aren't cost-effective or scalable for dealing with the growing threat of drone swarms or those low-cost loitering munitions. You need different approaches.
Like electronic warfare or directed energy, though the source doesn't detail those solutions, just notes the need.
Exactly. It highlights the need for solutions beyond just shooting expensive missiles at cheap drones.
Okay, so indigenous efforts are growing, but the report makes it clear that for now,
For the near term, yes, acquisitions will still be primarily imports. Building up that domestic capability takes time.
and who are the main suppliers, according to the report?
China is identified as the main supplier for the SAM systems themselves, the HQ-9s, LY-80s, FM-90.
But not exclusively.
No, Europe and the United States remain key providers for radar systems and related technologies.
And the report notes an interesting point about cost, doesn't it?
It does. It says cost isn't always the absolute deciding factor, particularly for the Air Force and Navy.
How so?
They've shown a willingness to acquire specific Western radar systems, like the Lockheed Martin TPS-77, Hensoldt updates for their existing MPDRs, and those Saab Erie Eye AEW&C platforms for the PAF.
So opportunities might still exist for Western vendors?
The report suggests yes, likely ongoing opportunities, particularly in the radar and sensor space for the PAF and Navy, despite the dominance of Chinese systems elsewhere.
Okay, so pulling this all together, what does this deep dive into the QA report really mean for you, the listener?
Well, I think it clearly shows how real-world conflicts, like the one in 2019 near Balakot, and especially what we're seeing in Ukraine.
They aren't just geopolitical headlines. They act as powerful catalysts, don't they?
Absolutely. Forcing countries to fundamentally reassess and, importantly, rapidly adapt their defense strategies. It's evolution under pressure.
And it illustrates a clear strategic shift in Pakistan's defense planning.
Definitely. Moving away from that older model of static, facility-focused air defense and primary reliance on fighters.
Towards what?
Towards a dynamic, multi-layered, increasingly integrated territorial defense network, one specifically designed to counter these evolving threats, standoff weapons, cruise missiles, and the proliferation of drones.
And it really highlights the crucial role that technology acquisition plays in all this.
For sure. Drawing on a diverse set of international suppliers, mainly China, but also Europe and the US, for specific tech, while simultaneously trying to build up a domestic defense industry.
It's a complex balancing act, shaping national security in the face of these changing threats.
So to quickly recap our journey here, we've seen Pakistan's air defense evolve quite dramatically.
From those basic GCI and HRAD systems decades ago.
To today's complex, multi-layered, and increasingly integrated network spanning the Army, Air Force, and Navy.
And this evolution isn't just happening in a vacuum. It's a direct response to hard lessons learned from recent conflicts.
Enabled by accessing modern technology, primarily from China and Turkey, but with other inputs too. It's a fascinating case study in rapid strategic adaptation, driven by real-world events.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, here's something based specifically on the report for you to consider.
Okay, let's hear it.
The analysis notes both the indigenous development of SAMs and counter-UAS systems in Pakistan, alongside that current very heavy reliance on imports.
Right, the long-term goal versus the current reality.
Exactly. So given Pakistan's stated long-term goal of increasing local defense production, how might the balance between acquiring foreign systems and developing domestic capabilities in its air defense shift over the next decade?
That's a good question to ponder. Where will that balance lie in, say, to 2035? Interesting thought.